Well, good afternoon. It's afternoon now. The ranks are still thin, but that's okay. It's to be expected. After Thanksgiving, we're going to lose several over Thanksgiving because of the turkey poisoning. Turkey tryptophan. People just won't be able to get up off the couch because of all the food. They'll just be stuck there till Christmas. They'll pry them up when they get Christmas gifts. So anyway, and then it's New Year's. So basically, here in about a week, you're not going to see anybody until about middle of January. They're all going to be semi-comatose from food, sugar. It starts with Halloween. That gets you going on the sugar and the food. And then it just doesn't stop, because after Halloween, then the Halloween candy's on sale. 70% off. I saw it yesterday? Day before yesterday. 70% off the Halloween candy. So I know you went out and bought it out. So now you're eating the Halloween candy till Thanksgiving. Then Thanksgiving, you got the turkey, you got the mashed potatoes. You got maybe the sweet potato pie or sweet potato with the marshmallows on it. No, you never had that? Well, you ought to try it. You take sweet potatoes, you put a bunch of brown sugar and butter in them. Then you put marshmallows over the top.
So you're invited to Thanksgiving then?
Well, you can come to my house. I won't be there, but you can certainly come on over. Anyway. Yeah, green bean casserole. You ever had that? No, you never had green bean casserole? What's that? What's a casserole? Wait a minute. We're going to have to do a special PowerPoint on just holiday food. Anyway, no, I can't explain it now. But a casserole is anything in a dish, pretty much. Put it in a dish and you bake it. It could be all kinds of stuff. All right. There you go. Yeah, the green bean casserole's got the green beans. Usually cream of mushroom soup. And then you put those little onion things on the top, right? Those, what are they called? Yes, yeah. It's like they come in a little package of fried onions. They're dry. Throw them on the top and you bake it. It's pretty good. That's pretty much all that's in that. Well, I didn't think I would be giving recipes this afternoon. But anyway, then after the Thanksgiving. Well, you eat on that. You graze on the Thanksgiving until it comes to all the holiday parties with all the cookies and the cakes and the, whatever else people dream up. And then after that, you got Christmas, and then after that you got the New Year's. After that, you can't even walk. You just got to lay on the couch. Somebody's got to carry you away. Well, speaking of being carried away, let's talk about after World War I, shall we? That's what we call a segue into business. Not a good one, but that was a segue. World War I, and then we'll talk about what happens afterwards. Oh, the M didn't make it on the end of that one. That's all right. You get the idea. It's nationalism. What we see in the aftermath of World War I, then, are lots of new countries. All kinds of new countries that did not exist just 4 or 5 years earlier, along ethnic lines. Most of them. Sometimes, some of them are artificially put together as well. Take, for example, the one pictured here. Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia is actually putting together of two sort of ethnic groups, two groups of people, the Czechs and the Slovaks, who don't necessarily always get along, by the way, and you put them together into one country, and you call it Czechoslovakia. You could have called it Slovo-Czechia. I guess that doesn't sound as good. Well, Czechoslovakia doesn't exist anymore, but that's a whole other story. And it didn't exist prior to World War I. But it gets put together, and we have others. Why? Because Germany lost the war. I know, spoiler alert. Germany lost World War I, just in case you're keeping track at home. And you remember Germany had just gained a whole lot of territory from World War I. Who did they gain it from? The Russians, exactly. The Russians had given away huge chunks of Europe, Eastern Europe, to Germany to get out of World War I. And then Germany turns around within, a year and a half, and they lose the war. Now, in the intervening period, the Russians have had a revolution. They've become a communist nation. So the Western leaders do not want to hand Russia back all this land to have it become communist. So they said this should be free land. Czechoslovakia, all right, and others will be free. Poland, these are going to have their own, they'll be their own country. They're not going to be under the thumb of the communist Russia. I don't know if if things had gone differently, if they would have handed all the land back. I mean, I guess Russians wouldn't have handed it over, right? So they would have just kept it. Well, we can't play what if in here. Some people like to do that. What if this happened or that happened? What would this be, that be? I would be far happier if we could just figure out what did happen rather than what could have happened. Once you figured out what did happen, then you can spend your time thinking about what could have happened, because it's hard to know what could happen if you didn't know what did happen, because what you think could happen maybe did happen if you don't know what did happen. Does any of that make sense? No. Okay, that's good. So here are the countries that are new. See, it's election day, so I thought if I talk in circles, you'd be used to it by now with all the campaign stuff. You just got to keep talking and try not to say anything. That's pretty much the first goal of a politician. And not offend anybody. That's why I'm not a politician, because I can't do the second part. I can talk a lot without saying anything. I mean, I do that every day, right? So, but not offending people. What's that? What? Oh, okay. All right. Well, we've got Finland, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, Poland, Austria, Czechoslovakia, and Hungary are all formed as brand new countries. All right? They weren't there before. Basically, the old Austro-Hungarian Empire falls apart, and all the territory that the Russians gave Germany prior to the war, because remember, the Austrians were on the side of the Germans, although the Germans were pretty much running things. The Ottomans were on the side of Germany. The Ottoman Empire, for all practical purposes, falls apart very soon after World War I. We don't have any Ottoman Empire left. That's a whole other story, maybe for another day. But things are changing. Big changes come after World War I. One of those is in territory. Now, that means that there are people, groups, that sort of get their own country that didn't have it before, have more autonomy, like say in Poland, Estonia, Latvia, Finland. Czechoslovakia is kind of just put those two together, I guess, because they were small. I don't know how they decided to do that, but they did. And we see, the basic thing is, you've got all these new countries, that have fledgling governments, fledgling economy, fledgling military, and the whole thing. So this is going, if you want to understand why World War II, one of the reasons that it could happen is you got all these new countries that are, they're going to be pretty easy to take over, to be quite honest, because they don't really have things organized very well, and everything's brand new. So let me just show you this. I'm going to show you two maps. We'll call this one Map A. And the other one we'll call it Map 2. No, we'll call it Map B. Map A shows you Europe prior to World War I, right before World War I. See all that green stuff? That's Germany and Austria. See the kind of pinkish stuff? I don't know what color it is. The Russia, and you see France and all that. Well, take a look, especially in this territory in Eastern Europe and Austria-Hungary. Take a look there, and when I hit the next one, hopefully it comes up, you'll see how different it is, right? See all those new countries? Let me go back so you can look at it again. I'll take a look. Okay, so you see all those countries I just listed for you, where they are. They're all in Eastern Europe. Most of them came out of the territory that Russia gave to the Germans and out of part of the old Austro-Hungarian Empire. Let's take a look at it again, just for fun. See, you got Romania, Bulgaria, Serbia, but look at Austria-Hungary and just to the north of that, up by the Baltic. Now you see Estonia. You see Finland way up there, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Czechoslovakia, right? And on down. So, there you go. That's one of the things. Remember I said also the Ottoman Empire falls apart. Oh. So let's talk a little bit about that too. One of the things that happens in the Middle East, the Ottoman Empire, again, spoiler alert, they were on the German side. The Germans lose. That means the Ottoman Empire loses. Why did the Ottoman Empire join in with the Germans? Because the Germans had been friendly to the Ottoman Empire. They had been selling them weapons. They had been advising them. They had been pumping money in to bolster up the government. And so it was natural, a natural thing. I mean, it was not unusual that when the war started, they went in on the German side. Because they were afraid of the English, the British, the French, and others would come in and take over their country. But they felt that the Germans would have a partnership with them. At any rate, they're on the German side. And when it ends, if you want to understand what's going on in the Middle East today, my advice is good luck. No. If you want to understand what's going on in the Middle East, you really have to take a look at what happens in the Middle East after World War I. There's no good way to understand it without knowing that. So if that's something that interests you, something you have questions about, to understand even where the countries in the Middle East come from, or why some of them might be upset, bitter about the West, about Western Europe and so forth, as some of them are, you can go back and take a look at what happened in World War I and in the years following. Well, what does happen? The idea here is they start to divide up the Ottoman Empire because the Ottoman Empire falls apart. So we even have Turks, that is native, Turks, who are not for the Ottoman Empire. We call it the Turkish, Ottoman Empire, but they don't like the Sultan. They don't want that kind of government. They want a Republic of Turkey, nationalism. So they end up getting that. That's a whole other story, and that takes a lot of fighting and on their part to hold that territory. But to the south, in what we traditionally call the Middle East, those lands were held by the Ottomans, are now going to be taken over, controlled by primarily the British and the French. The British and the French. So, we're going to see that France will come and occupy Lebanon and Syria. Britain will control Iraq and Palestine. Of course, they already controlled Egypt. They had controlled Egypt for quite a while. They will now more directly control Egypt. Now, part of what is happening in the aftermath of World War I, especially Woodrow Wilson, who, by the way, is the President of the United States at the time, in case you didn't remember that. Woodrow Wilson had a little saying. He said that we should have victory without victors. I don't know quite how you do that. I don't know quite how you have victory without victors, but that's what he wanted. In other words, he didn't really want Germany to be punished. Can I get you to take this thing out? Thanks. He wanted basically, and he didn't want any of the Allies to gain territory. So in other words, he didn't want Britain to gain a bunch of territory, France to gain territory. That's why we have all these fledgling democracies. They're not controlled by anyone. Now, in the Middle East, everybody backed off of that just a little bit. They didn't have colonies, but they ended up having what were called mandates. Mandates, mainly because Wilson and some others opposed any gaining of territory. And so they said, okay, we can have mandates. That's what they're called. This is not when one man dates another. A mandate is a territory that's controlled by a country. If you ask me, what is the difference between a mandate and a colony, I'll tell you to look it up for yourself. There's not a whole lot of difference, to be quite honest. You forced me, I would say, officially it's not a colony, but it functions very much in the same way as a colony. Okay? So, the British have the British Mandate territory. They already control Egypt. They've been controlling Egypt, and now they control it more fully since World War I. But now they begin to control Palestine, which today would include the countries of Israel and Jordan, and Iraq. And Iraq at that time also controlled Kuwait. So they're over in the Gulf. That's the territory the British wanted. To the north, the French control Lebanon, which is out on the coast, and Syria. And they had that all as one big chunk. Okay? Now, officially, these mandates are under the control of the League of Nations. That's the official line. They're not, technically colony of Britain or France. They're under the League of Nations. Now, the League of Nations, as you might remember from your study terms, is what? What is the League of Nations? Yeah.
This is where multiple countries banded together to try and make peace and talk things out.
Yeah, I mean, you might see it. I mean, if you know what the United Nation is, it's similar to the United Nations, right? In fact, it's a forerunner to it. The League of Nations was a league of nations. Several nations would come together, like she said, to talk about peace, to bring up issues, disputes people might have over borders or trade or whatever. The idea was you would bring it to this group and try to work out some agreement, and the hope was that would avoid war. Okay? That was the hope. Now, here's a problem with the League of Nations. It never had much power. The United Nations, some people argue today the United Nations doesn't have much power. I mean, it's kind of for show, right? But, they do have some sanctions. They do have different things that they do. The United Nations has more power than the League of Nations ever had. Okay? So that means the League of Nations, if you think the United Nations isn't very powerful, then the League of Nations is even less powerful. And part of the reason it was less powerful is that the guy who dreamed it up, Woodrow Wilson, from the United States, the United States never joins the League of Nations. What? Why didn't the United States join the League of Nations? Because a thing called Congress didn't like what Woodrow Wilson was doing. Can you imagine Congress not liking what a president's doing? I'm sure you can't. So we think that's a new thing. It's not a new thing. It's been around for a long time. So the Congress basically did not want to go into World War I. They were kind of, I won't say forced, but their hand was pressed because of the submarine warfare of the Germans to even enter World War I. They didn't want to go into World War I. It took an extreme act to get them to go in. And they certainly didn't like this sort of internationalism of Woodrow Wilson. That Woodrow Wilson is trying to sort of tell the European. The people in the United States had isolationism. That was their thing. That was what they were thinking. They said, you know what? We want to leave people alone and want people to leave us alone. You know, kind of like the way I am. I just go home. I don't want anybody to call me. I don't want anybody to come over. I just want to sit on the couch with my chihuahua and watch television. But people just keep pulling me out. I got to go to class. I got to go to meetings. I got to go do things. They pull me out. Just let me sit at home. I got a lazy boy recline. Just let me sit there and watch my shows. Well, or whatever. Well, that's sort of what the way the United States was. Just leave us alone. You know, we got enough problems of our own. We don't want to get involved with European problems. We don't want to get involved with the Middle East and all these other things. We just want to, you know, you leave us alone, we'll leave you alone. Let's just get along, right? Well, yeah. I mean, that's my goal. My question is, why can't we just all get along? And the answer is, we can't. We can't all get along. We have thousands of years of history to attest to the fact that we cannot get along. We're always fighting, arguing, warring, and so forth. Well, anyway, so the League of Nations was weak. These mandates were controlled by the League of Nations. The United States never ratified the Treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles, which ends World War I. Part of the Treaty of Versailles was joining the League of Nations. And part of the reason we didn't ratify that, or Congress wouldn't allow it to be ratified, is because it did have the League of Nations. Now here I've got an excellent little political cartoon that if you understand it, I don't have to say anything. You just look at it and you go, oh, I get it, and we just move on. You got it? We can move on? Well, maybe I will explain. Here we have the throne, the chair, you know, that's the United States. On the throne, the King of the United States is the U.S. Constitution. There's a radical thought for you. We ought to follow the Constitution. I know, that's just the way I am. I'm a pretty radical guy. We should follow the Constitution. First of all, you know, you should read it sometime. Might help to know, see if we're following it, actually. Anyway, the Constitution, I know, I'm silly, but, you know, the U.S. Constitution is on the throne. In other words, it's our document that governs our government. Our government is governed by the Constitution, at least it's supposed to be, in theory, right? Now, take a look at this other scroll, trying to horn in on the Constitution, trying to sit down on the throne of the United States, is the League Covenant of the League of Nations. This is where a lot of people got upset. They said, look, if we ratify the League of Nations, we are handing over some of our sovereignty as the United States to the League of Nations. They didn't like that idea. They didn't want to hand over any authority to another body. They said that goes against the Constitution. All right. So the Congress refused some of the measures of the Treaty of Versailles, especially this one about the League of Nations and saying that we would agree to the covenant of the League of Nations. It didn't fit with our isolationism, and many people felt it weakened the Constitution, the role of the Constitution, that the United States was giving up its sovereignty. Okay. So, the United States never ratified the Treaty of Versailles. Therefore, the United States never joined the League of Nations. And we, you know, it was sort of our idea, or Wilson's idea. And we were, by this time, a major power in the world, even though maybe we didn't want to be, you know. When you're sitting on your couch in your living room, you know, it's hard to sit there if you're a major power. People keep bugging you about stuff. So maybe we weren't that happy about it, But that's what had happened, especially in the aftermath of World War I. We emerge as one of the main players in the world. And after World War II, we emerge as one of two major powers in the world, right? The Soviet Union and the United States. Well, there was also a defensive alliance as a part of the Treaty of Versailles. This defensive alliance you might see as sort of the forerunner to NATO. Maybe you've heard of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. We'll talk more about it later. But this defensive alliance, which basically would say if somebody attacked, let's say France, it would automatically be considered they had attacked Great Britain and the United States, you see. But this would draw us into any European war immediately. Wouldn't have to wait, what, 3 years? Yeah, about 3 years. We'd be drawn in right away. And again, some people said, look, we don't want to be drawn into these other wars. Now, then other people said, well, if we're in this defensive thing, it'll be a deterrent against war. Well, anyway, the United States never joined the League of Nations. The League of Nations was rather weak, and it only had limited economic sanctions that it could impose on anyone that didn't follow what they said. They'll say, well, now if you don't do that, well, we in the League of Nations won't trade with you. We'll limit our trade or whatever. That's about all they could do. So it's pretty weak, and of course it falls apart certainly with the coming of World War II. You might say, though, it gets reformed after World War II into the United Nations. Okay? Okay. Now, what are some of the things that happened then? We're talking about some of the things that happened after World War I. One of the things that happens is that they want to blame, this is even though Wilson said, look, we want victory without victors. That didn't go over so well with the French. It didn't go over so well with some of the British, but especially the French. They said, look, I mean, France, big chunks of France look like the moon, right? A lot of the war was fought in France. A lot of French, not only countryside and farms and resources and people died, as well as a lot of British died, a lot of Germans died. But the French said, look, this is the Germans' fault. They want to blame the Germans completely for the war. Okay, you might make an argument for that. Kind of was their fault, I guess, you might say. But what about the Austrians? What about the Russians? What about the Serbians? I mean, there was maybe some other blame you could spread around. But once the war gets going, obviously Germans are the enemy. They're the ones moving it forward. And so when they lose the war, the thing here is we need to punish them with what are called war reparations. War reparations. We don't use the word reparation too much in an everyday conversation. But let's say, for example, you're out in the yard, maybe playing a little baseball. Somebody throws you a pitch. You really connect with it. And it goes through your neighbor's window. Right? Smashes out their window or breaks something else. So what happens? Well, you hide. You hide and you never admit to it, and nothing happens. Your neighbor has to put a new one. No, probably you get caught because the baseball maybe has your name on it, or somebody saw you do it. Or you just are such a good person, you confess. You walk over immediately and knock on the door of your neighbor. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Smith. I was playing baseball and I broke your window. So what's going to happen? Well, the least that would happen, you would think, is that you should pay to get the window fixed, right? Because you caused the damage to the window, then you pay for the repairs to the window. That seems fair, right? But that's a reparation. Now, sometimes reparations go even further. It's not just fixing the window. Well, now Mrs. Smith said, well, yeah, but look, I got glass in my carpet, and then now it's, I've got to deal with this. I got to call a repair person. It's inconvenient. It's disrupting my life. So we're going to charge you more than just the cost of the window. What lawyers love to call pain and suffering, right? Hopefully you'll never find out about this. But lawyers have all kinds of terms for things that they then quantify with money that you're supposed to pay to somebody else, but by the way, they get a cut of it. Anyway, okay. So, okay, the window, let's say the window's $200, but now the inconvenience of having your window knocked out and have to contact a guy to come fix it and have to wait for that to happen. And you're going to have to put some plastic or something over your window to keep out the rain and the weasels and stuff out in your yard. You want to make sure they don't get inside your house. Or the lizards. Got a lot of lizards in Florida. I think I've got a lizard in my house. He's a sneaky little devil. Occasionally I'll see him, and my dogs go crazy when they see it. But then, it can hide. It's very fast. Gets under the bed, gets behind something, I can't find a little guy, so I don't know what to do about it. I've just kind of left him for now. What? Oh, all right, I see. We've got songs. That's good. Well, they say, look, you're going to have to pay for the war. What are you going to have to pay? We got to watch our music videos and stuff. Play our games. 132 billion with a B marks. Now remember, this is in, like 1919, 1920. So $1 billion was worth a lot more back then. It's worth a lot now, still, but worth a whole lot more back then. That's 100 years ago, $1 billion. Not $1 billion today, all right? Well, basically, not only did the French want 132 billion marks, that's more than dollars, by the way. A mark, we don't have German marks anymore, but they were almost $2. It was almost $2 for a German mark, if I remember correctly, about $1.85. Of course, it fluctuated, but it was closer to $2 than it was $1. So that's a lot of money, and they want it in gold. They don't want it in like German. They don't want like write us a check. No, we want you to load up gold and hand it over to us and do it every year. So that's $2.5 billion a year, right? And you can figure out how many years. What is that, like 6 years, 5 years? So over a 5 or 6 year period, you're going to give us $2.5 billion in gold every year. Well, guess what? The Germans don't have 132 billion marks in gold to hand over. My mother used to have a lot of sayings. I cannot repeat them all to you, just for propriety's sake. So I won't. But one of them she used to say in a situation like this is you can't get blood out of a turnip. You've probably never heard that saying before, and you may never hear it again. But you can't get blood out of a turnip. What does that mean? You can squeeze a turnip, you can cut it up, you can do whatever you want to the turnip, but you're not going to get any blood. Why? Because there's none there. So, when we would often get bills from a bill collector, or somebody else wanted something from my mother she didn't have, she'd say, well, you can't get blood out of a turnip. You're not going to get $2.5 billion in gold a year if we don't have any gold. Probably got a few turnips in Germany, but they didn't have any gold. So after the first year, they couldn't pay it. So what happens then? Well, the French say, well, if you can't pay us the gold, then we're going to, again, they're not going to take over the land. I mean, they're going to occupy parts of Germany. In fact, what they're going to occupy is the most valuable part of Germany, the Ruhr River Valley. Why? Because it was along this river and in this valley that that a lot of German factories were located. It's one of the most prosperous areas of Germany, and they just took it over. And guess what? They keep making stuff there, but when they sell it, all the money goes to France, not to Germany. And Germany still owes them money. So they run the factories and they say, okay, there's our payment. So here are the French gunboats in the river valley controlling the factories and taking the money. By the way, one of the provisions of the Treaty of Versailles is that Germany could not have an army, could not have a military. They could not militarize. So not much the Germans are going to be able to do about it, at least for now. There's not much they can do about it. Now this is what Wilson wanted to avoid. Because what's happening, what it does happen, certainly, is this embitters the Germans. First of all, they're being completely blamed for the war. Secondly, they're asked for huge reparations in a rather unreasonable fashion. And thirdly, now their land is basically being taken over by the French to run. Now you might say, well, that's fair. You lost the war. Okay. But it does create bitterness. And for the Germans, their economy is already terrible. I mean, it was already terrible because remember, they were fighting a two-front war for most of the war, and they were pretty much fighting alone. The Italians had backed out. The Austrians didn't help much. So you had the Germans fighting the French, the British, and the Russians, and then later on the United States. So they had lost equipment, lots of people, lots of money, and now they got to pay war reparations. So guess what? Their economy is terrible. So what do you do when the economy's terrible? Well, I'll tell you something probably you shouldn't do, but this is what they did. They began to print up more money. They're the government, right? Just print up some more. We don't have enough money? All right, go down to the mint, go down to the press there. Let's just print out some more Deutschmarks. So what happens, what would happen here, even here in the United States or anywhere, if we just decided, hey, we're just going to print up a lot more money and just send it around the country that way because there's not enough money out there, people are complaining. Yeah, inflation, the value would go down. Exactly. So what I bought for $1 today or yesterday would now, who knows, cost me $2. Maybe next week it'll cost me $3, maybe next 4, 5. Well, this is exactly what happened. Everything in Germany that was tangible, a commodity like food, clothes, that kind of stuff, the stuff you usually buy with money, the price of it goes way up. And in fact, it would go up in one day. So that people, if they needed to try to buy stuff, they would try to go before work and buy it because they knew when they got out of work, the price would probably be doubled. Can you imagine that? I need to buy a loaf of bread. So I go to the store this morning before they raise the price. If I try to get it tonight, it's going to cost me quite a bit more. And so when then you get paid, well, the money is useless. This is where you start, it eventually gets to where it's useless, and they have these pictures. I don't think I have a good one here. But they were actually hauling Deutschmarks around in wheelbarrows to take them to the store to try to buy something. I mean, a big wheelbarrow full of money to, get a loaf of bread and a few things. People were burning the money to keep warm in the winter because it was basically worthless. That's how bad it was getting in Germany. Inflation, this will be eventually, but inflation will rise. So, by the way, perhaps ironically, the United States never joined the League of Nations, but Germany does. They joined the League of Nations in 1926. So we'll come back to the monetary problems of the Germans later because, spoiler alert, it is going to affect other people. All right. Now let's talk about Kellogg-Briand Pack. Now this is not a new cereal from Michigan, Battle Creek, like Bran Flakes or something. This is Briand, not Brand. Briand, Kellogg-Briand Pact. There was a guy named Kellogg and a guy named Briand, and they signed a pact. Well, the Kellogg guy was the United States Secretary of State. The French foreign minister was named Briand. They had a meeting in 1928. Not just them, but they sort of led the meeting. Many others attended the meeting. What was the meeting discussing? How terrible war was. Remember how terrible World War I was? We talked about millions and millions of people dying and poison gas and landmines and so on. Yeah. They said, look, that's why people called it the Great War, because it was so massive, but people also called it the war to end all wars. The idea was that World War I was so terrible that, of course, people would decide we would never have war again because it's so terrible. That's what this meeting was about. Did you know that all warfare has been outlawed since 1928? 63 nations signed the agreement. Well, obviously, that wasn't followed for very long, was it? Within 10 years, the Germans will be on the move. 12 years, 13 years, and we're in the midst of World War II. You know, when we look at this period between World War I and World War II, many people have argued that World War I and World War II are really just the same war. I don't want to confuse you, but I mean that they're not the same war, but I mean they're symptoms of the same war. In other words, you got a war with an intermission. You got one giant war starting around 1914 and going till about 1945, and you got a little intermission there, right, in the 1920s and early 30s. So you got about a 15-year ceasefire, 15, 16-year ceasefire, and then it leads right into the next war. Well, it's true. I mean, the sides of the war are similar. The issues are similar. One war certainly leads into the other war. I don't know if I'd say they're the same war. But part of it, you know, you have these huge war reparations. Germany has been blamed. This unites the Germans to say, look, we can't even have an army. They're taking over our productive land. We don't have any money. What are we going to do? So the German people, who had been very powerful, they had the strongest economy of all of Europe, maybe the world, at the beginning, right before World War I. Now they have about the worst economy. And they can't have any military at all. So huge changes for Germany that makes several of the people bitter. They're embittered by it, the aftermath of the war. And that's going to give an opportunity for somebody to come as a leader who says, look, I can make the German nation powerful again. I can make the German nation something to be reckoned with. All right, well, let's go to the Great Depression, just because we like to have fun. Now, what happens? Germany needs money. Where are they going to get that money? Well, they're certainly not going to get it from, the French, right? Not going to get it from the British. So who loans them the money? The United States loans them the money. U.S. banks begin loaning money to Germany so that the German economy can continue, doesn't completely collapse. Some of them thought, well, you know, the United States was doing, you know, it was called the Roaring '20s for us. Things were doing really well economically for the United States. So they said, you know what? We got to keep this going. We've got to make more and more money. How are we going to make more money? Well, now here's the thing. I know you guys know this because you're all very wealthy. No? Well, let's say you have a lot of money. If you just hang on to that money, let's say you have $5 million. Let's just say you got $5 million. What are you going to do with that $5 million? Well, I know what you guys are going to do. You're going to spend it all in like one day. Anyway, what you'll find out is if you hang on to the money, let's just say I don't spend it, I just hang on to the $5 million, you're actually losing money. Because if you're holding on to the money, you're not investing the money, there is always some inflation, if nothing else. The price of things goes up. So let's say, oh, I'm not going to buy a house, and so you wait, and then the price of a house goes up. So now you've actually lost money. You should have maybe bought the house. And, you know, these are things you got to think about. So if you hang on to the money, you actually are losing money. It may not seem like it, but you are. Yes?
What is a bond? Like, I thought a bond is something like you invest. Is that something like you invest?
A bond you invest, yes. So a bond is something you buy now, and then you would cash it in or trade it later. So I would buy, let's take a simple one like U.S. savings bond. All right? You buy a $50 or $100 U.S. savings bond, and maybe now I don't know what you pay for that now. Maybe you pay $60 for a $100 bond, but then you can't cash out that $100 bond and get the $100 until it's like 30 years in the future. All right? So basically, you're buying something with the anticipation that its value will go up. So there are bonds like that are, say, U.S. Treasury bonds. That's usually what people buy. Or sometimes city issues bonds, like City of Lakeland. I don't know. They probably have bonds. People can buy those, and you're sort of investing in the city. And if you believe that Lakeland is a place that's going to grow, then you think your money will go up. And what you're doing is also going to encourage the growth of Lakeland. You probably have other things in Lakeland that'll also help too. Like you've got your own businesses in Lakeland, so you want to see it grow. Anyway, that's what a bond is. Stocks is where you're buying a part of a company or a corporation. So you're hoping that that corporation does well. If it does well, then the price of their stocks goes up. But again, you don't get any of the money till you cash it out. Right? So a lot of this money is kind of money in theory, I guess. I mean, it's not, you don't have it in your hand. You don't have it. So, you know, like when you go down to the bank, let's say if you took your $5 million and you say, I'm going to go down to the local bank, all right? And I'm going to put my $5 million in the bank. Well, that would be better, I think, than putting it in your mattress or burying it in a box in your backyard. Well, it's up to you. But at least there, theoretically, it's safer, right? And if you put $5 million in there all at once, they're going to give you some interest on it. There are much better ways that you could do it, though. But they're not going to. If you could have a savings account today, you don't get much interest on your money. I don't know what it is. It's not even 2%. I don't think it's like one. What's that?
I think it's
1.5. Okay, that's not much. I don't know if that even keeps up with inflation. See, it's better than hanging on to it. If I hang on to it, all the inflation I lose. If I put it in there and I get a little bit at like 1.5% interest and inflation is 2 or 3%, I'm losing less. So what you really need to do is invest that money. The United States had a lot of money, so they wanted to invest it to make even more money. That's the idea anyway. That's the theory. Now, of course, with any investment, as they'll tell you and they'll announce on television, there are always risks. Right? So the U.S. banks loan money to Germany, right? So let's say you go down to the bank and you put in $5 million. This is going to become important later on. What does the bank do with that money? They put it in a big vault and lock it up and just hold on to it until you come to get it? No. They take your money and they begin to spend your money. They begin to use your money. So if you put $5 million in there today and you go next week and say, I want my $5 million back, they're not going to be able to hand it all to you. And I want it all in cash, $1 bills. Right? They're not going to have that. They're not going to have $5 million sitting in the vault in a local bank. Because bank doesn't make any money that way. What the bank does is when you put your money in the bank, they take your money and then they invest it in something else, like somebody building a house or somebody starting a business or a whole host of other things. They put it in some short-term bonds and stocks and stuff like that. They try to make money off of your money. That's important for what's going to happen later. So the U.S. banks begin to take some of this money that they have and we're going to invest it in Germany. We think it's pretty stable over there now, you know, war's been outlawed. The German people are very industrious. You know, they'll come back. I mean, I'm sure, I don't think they're thinking, well, I'm sure they're not thinking what happens is going to happen or they would have never loaned them the money. What they're thinking is that Germany is a pretty good bet. And we can turn this around. Germany had the best economy in all of Europe just a few years ago, and if we invest our money there now, the Germans are going to turn it around and we're going to make money on our money. I'm sure that's what they're thinking. So, what we have then in Europe in the 1920s is prosperity, or at least what appears to be prosperity. There's a lot of money flowing around Europe. Where's it coming from? The United States. The United States is loaning money to the Germans, for example. The Germans have to turn around and pay the French. The Germans then buy stuff from the French and the British. This money that the United States is loaning now ends up in England, it ends up in France, it ends up in Germany, and it's fueling their economy. Right? Because if people have money, you know, some people just, if they got some money in their pocket, it's like they've got a fire in their pocket. They got to put it out. There's only one way to put it out. Spend that money. I got a new credit card, and it's got a $5,000 limit. Let's see if we can get it to $5,050 and see what they do. That's all right, because you know, if you max that one out, you just get another credit card, right? Another $2,000, another $5,000 from the MasterCard people instead of the Visa people. And I've told you how I pay my MasterCard and Visa. When I get my Visa bill, I pay it with my MasterCard. And when I get my MasterCard, I pay it with my Visa. If I start running out of money, I just get another card. It's no problem. Makes it a little bit interesting, you know, towards the end of the month, but I got to try to flip all this money around. No, you shouldn't do that. That was a joke. All right. Sometimes people don't. Sometimes, I'm not quite sure what that was. That may have been more than one thing. But we're going to assume it was a phone. So, anyway, there's a lot of money floating around Europe, and it's all coming from the United, well, all, but I mean most of it's coming from the United States. Since the United States is freely loaning out all this money, money is flowing all over the place around Europe, and people are having a big party over there in Europe. They're throwing parties. They're, you know, if you ever, well, they probably saw that movie because it had, what's his name in it? The Great Gatsby, right? Did you see that movie? The Great Gatsby? Didn't see it? Did you see it? All the money they had, the big parties and all the stuff going on. That was the Roaring 20s. That's all that money. So let's have a big party. Let's eat all this food. Let's take trips. Let's buy cars. Let's do whatever. We got plenty of dough. Let's spend it. That's what was going on. Where was all that money coming from? United States banks. And the United States banks had invested in Germany. The United States banks had invested in the stock market of the United States because we're growing. And here's the thing, you know, you put this money in and you're going to get the money out. By the way, something like this happened, what was it now, about 10 years ago here in the United States. I had a big crash of the real estate market, you see. I knew somebody about that time, like 2007, something like that. They were going to move to Las Vegas. Okay. So they went out there and they looked around. And when they came back, they said, yeah, we bought a condo, not a big place, but we bought a place in Las Vegas. I said, oh. I said, well, is it nice? They said, well, it's not built yet. So what do you mean it's not built yet? Well, everything's selling so fast that ours isn't built yet. I said, well, why didn't you wait until it's built to buy it? Oh, we can't wait till it's built, because if we wait till it's built, the price is going up. We buy it now before it's built, we're going to save like $100,000 or $50,000 or whatever, because by the time it's built, the price of our condo is going to be $100,000 more than what we're paying for it. Because that's just how fast the prices are going up. Now, let's say that was true, and I think it was true. You can start to click something off in your mind here. Maybe I'll buy that condo, and when it's built, I'll sell it, and I'll make $100,000, and I won't spend anything. Sounds pretty good? And in the meantime, I'll take that $100,000, and then I'll buy 2 condos, and then I'll sell them. Then I'll make even more money. Then I'll buy 5 condos, then I'll buy 10 houses and sell them. I'll flip this house. And by the time the house is done or I fix it up or whatever, boom, the price has gone up $50,000, $100,000, whatever. That's exactly what everybody was doing, let's say from about 2005 to 2008 or 9, when the whole thing collapsed. Because the money wasn't tangible. It was based upon, it was a gamble. I buy this condo now with money I don't have so that I can sell it in 6 months, pay off the money I borrowed, and I keep the difference. That's basically gambling. And that's what happened. And then when the price drops, everybody lost money. All over the country, people lost huge amount of money on real estate. Banks came. The other thing that was happening too, since we're talking about it, I guess maybe, I don't know if we should, well, it relates to the Great Depression. The other thing that was happening is that banks and people making the home loans and the realtors and everybody else really wanted you to buy stuff because that's how they made money. If you go to a realtor and buy a house, they get like 3-4% of the price of the house they get, right? Sometimes more. So they want you to be able to buy the house, right? If you don't buy the house, they don't make any money. And the banks want you to get the house because they get a commission, they get a percentage every loan they write. So they began loaning money to people who really could never pay the loan. They even wrote out loans, gave people loans where for, say, the first 5 years, a person didn't have enough money. They said, don't worry about it. For the first 5 years, you'll just pay the interest on the loan. So you're borrowing, let's say, $200,000. All you're going to pay every month's the interest. Not anything on the principal. Don't worry about it. Then at the end of 5 years, there'll be this balloon payment, and then we'll renegotiate it. You'll be fine. You can get into this house now, though, while the price is low. People started signing it, sure. Then what happens? That 5 year comes, you got to pay a balloon payment of maybe $30,000, $40,000, no down payment. You got to pay it in 5 years. People began to not be able to do that. Then they have the foreclosure on their house. On and on it goes. Well, that's what's happening here. Because all this money is invested, at least 23 billion marks was invested, primarily by the United States, into Germany, and from there to the rest of Europe, in about 5 years. So, almost 5 billion marks a year for 5 years. And then in 1929, this house of cards, we're going to call it, that everything's just going to keep going up and everything's going to keep going, kind of like that land in the United States, is just going to keep going way up. It suddenly crashes in October of 1929. The stock market crashes. So what does that mean? Well, you've taken your money and you've put it in the stock market. Why? Because it's going up, 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 up. And you're going to make money off of it. And guess what? When you do make the money, instead of cashing out, you just put it back in. Double down, right? I got this stock. Now it's worth double. What am I going to do with that money? Am I going to cash it out now? No. Let it ride. I'll buy even more. Then it's going to double again. I'll make even more. And then what happens is the stock market crashes. Guess what? People who are like millionaires, multi-millionaires in the morning are broke by the end of the day because they have all their money invested. They don't have any tangible money or very, very little. People get in despair. There is panic. People in New York, for example, are jumping out of windows. Rich or formerly rich businessmen, tycoons, they're just jumping out because they cannot imagine their life without this money. Their whole world has been devastated. So, jump out the window. They don't want to face it. Then there's a panic. You know what the panic is? Well, let's say, I don't have much money in the bank. Let's say I got $5,000 in the bank. But I get nervous that rich guys are jumping out of windows in New York. So I'm thinking, this seems pretty serious. So, you say, you know what? I'm going to go down to that bank and I'm going to get my $5,000 out. I'll put it in my mattress or something, right? I'm not going to keep it in the bank. And so people go down to the bank. Now, some people did that at first, but guess what? The bank doesn't have all that money in there. And the banks can cover it at first. But then when things keep getting worse and more people want to get their money, some of the banks, you know what they did? If you've got your money in the bank, and the bank, they're not open much anyway, right? They're open like, they didn't have ATMs and electronic transfers and all that stuff like we have now. You had to physically go to the bank and go up to the window and wait in line and hand them a check or a piece of paper and sign it, and then they would give you the cash. That's how it worked in those days. And most banks were only open, like 9 to 2, 9 to 4, 9 to 3. You know what they did? We're closed. Just put up the closed sign. That's one way to keep people from taking money out of the bank. That's a bank holiday. Everybody's on vacation today. Bank is closed. And then they just sort of left it closed. So a bunch of banks began to close. And the money you had in the bank, theoretically it's there, but you can't get it. That's what leads to a panic. So the banks in the United States, guess what? They don't have the money they need to pay the people coming to get their money. Guess what they're going to do? They're going to call in their loans. And who do they have loans to? The Germans. So they tell the Germans, you got to pay us. You got to pay us now. Germans don't have the money because they gave it to the French. And the French don't have the money because they bought champagne and stuff. People didn't have the money. So all these loans start getting called in. Banks began to fail. 5,000 U.S. banks failed. 5,000 of them just shut down, and any money you had in there, it's not there. If you had your 5,000, your 2,000, whatever you had in there, sorry, we're closed. We're out of business. Where's your money? Now, I suppose you could try to legally go to court and fight and get the money or whatever, but like my mother used to say, you can't get blood out of a turnip. If the bank doesn't have the money, you're not going to get your money. Or if you do get the money, you'll get like pennies on the dollar. You'll get 25 cents for every dollar that you put in, maybe. So your 5,000 will suddenly become a whole lot less money. Well, as this happens then, the Depression, as it's called, and this comes to be called the Great Depression, triggered by the stock market crash and also by all this loaning of money, easy money, so to speak, money's flowing. But as the Depression comes, guess what? Banks are closing down, people can't get their money. Other people are very worried, so whatever money they have, they don't want to spend. Are they going to spend it on, hey, let's buy a new car? No. Let's take a vacation? No. Let's go out to eat? No. We're going to buy a new house? No, we're not going to do any of that stuff. And guess what? If nobody's doing any of that stuff, then we don't need to build cars. We don't need to build houses. We don't need services. So that means more and more people get put out of jobs because nobody's spending money. The way the economy works, people get money, then they spend the money. And when they spend the money, then other people get the money, and then you get more money. That's just, it gets a little kind of complicated. But basically, if nobody's spending money, the whole economy begins to shut down. The demand for U.S. products goes, and guess what? If a guy's got a factory making whatever, and nobody's buying it, he's going to tell you, no need for you to come into work. We got a warehouse full of whatever it is we make, and nobody's buying them. We're not making more because we don't have the money to make more, and nobody's buying them. See how that works? So unemployment goes way up. Population was much less at the time, but we had 15 million people pretty rapidly out of work. And in May of 1931, about a year and a half later, right, one of the major banks of Europe fails. In Austria, which was one of the main banks used in Germany, and then other banks, German banks, British banks, they all begin to fail and close. And more, there's a mushrooming, there's a domino effect of this into Europe. From the United States, since we had loaned most of the money out, we're calling our money in, we're not loaning any more out, then things begin to fail. And the more industrialized the nation, let's put it this way, more industrialized the nation was, the harder the Depression hit them. So France was actually least affected by the Depression because they didn't have that many factories. They were mostly working in commodities like farm goods, grapes, grain, cows, that kind of stuff people still needed, and you could trade for them. But if you got a factory where you buy raw materials and you make something and then you sell it, much tougher on people that were more industrialized. Now, certainly it hurt France too, but not as much as, say, Germany, certainly. Well, what's going to be the response to the Great Depression? It's going to have great upheaval across the world, really. Certainly Western Europe and the United States. With all the upheaval, some people began to turn their attention towards Marxism, socialism, and communism. They said, well, I guess what we need is to listen to old Karl. Have the government control everything. Control the prices. Control what's made. Control what people use. Control everything. Maybe that's a better deal. So interest in it began to grow. Certainly people were upset. People were hungry. People were out of work. People needed answers. Well, interest in Marxism did go up. And people began to entertain ideas they never would have before, which actually have become standard way we do business today, in government anyway. For example, the government today has a great debt. We don't talk about it much, right? But we have a huge debt. Trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars in debt the United States is. Okay? And that's what we do. I mean, that's just, nobody even seems to care anymore. Yeah, okay, we'll just spend more money and we'll just print up more money and we'll just borrow more money and we take things that are supposedly saved for the future, like let's say Social Security, and we spend it right now. So we have a Social Security program. Many people believe, for example, well, I mean, they are paying into Social Security and Medicare and all these other things. and they think that that money is just sitting in the bank waiting for you to retire and to give it back to you with interest? No. The government is immediately spending it. They're applying it towards our budget. It's a part of our budget line. Yeah, they monkey around with it a little bit. They change the way they talk about it, but that's what they're doing. That money's not there. That's why we're getting in trouble. Because we got a lot of people getting ready to retire very soon. And we got fewer people that are working and contributing. You can do the math. Basically what's been happening is, when it started, Social Security, let's say all of you are paying, right? So let's say it was 50 to 1 or something. 50 people were paying, one person retired. Pretty easy for the government to build up a lot of money, right? If all of you are paying your retirement, we're only paying it out to one person. That's what we call a pyramid scheme in regular business, right? All of you guys pay me $10, and then, you go find 10 more people to give you $10, and then you give me a cut of that. And, that's basically what it's been. So 50 people, I don't know, I don't have the exact numbers. So let's say for 50 people who are paying into it, maybe one person is paying out. Maybe even bigger than that, maybe 100, maybe 1,000. Because very few people got the benefit at the beginning. But a lot of people were paying in. So they had this buildup of money just sitting there, and theoretically nobody was supposed to stay. They said, well, we're supposed to save that for people's retirement, And but you know how it is. The government sees money sitting there. People see money sitting there. They want to spend it. They want to use it. Well, why should we borrow money? Why should we not do this? We got this money just sitting right there. Let's build that road. Let's do this. Let's do that. So they began to use that money. And it's fine, because we got more people paying in than we have paying out. And if we get in a bind, we just charge the people who are paying in even more. We'll just up the ante. You got to pay a bigger percentage each year. Now, so this is what they're doing today, is they're saying, well, it used to be you got your money when you were 65. Now they're saying it's 67. Pretty soon it's going to be 70. Okay? 70. And then probably it'll be 71, 72. I don't know. Because they don't have enough money to pay everybody. We got a whole bunch of people getting ready to retire. I mean, they already are. They're in the process of retiring. And they're not going to pay in anymore, but they're going to want money out. And they got fewer people paying in. That's a big problem. Nobody wants to talk, even though this is election day, nobody wants to talk about that issue. There's no way you'll get elected by saying, oh, I'm going to eliminate Social Security, or I'm going to reduce this, or charge you more, or do that. Nobody even talks about it. Well, we still got a minute. I know everybody's antsy. They've been packing up for the last 5 minutes. What's that?
You don't have a minute. It's 1:15.
Sure I do. It's 1:14.
No.
Well, I go by my clock. My clock is set by the people at Apple, and we know that they control the world. Apple knows everything. They know what you had for lunch. They know what you're going to do this afternoon before you know it. All right. We'll see you later.
Okay.